God bless the late, great Aretha Franklin, the Queen of Soul. I think she might even make a little appearance with Chris later on this morning. She could sing and preach and play and compose and improvise and inspire like a house on fire. We have, rightly, run out of superlatives to describe her gift, her impact, her legacy. But among all the accolades and remembrances and tributes I've read since she died this week, there is one point of praise I have not heard. Aretha Franklin could spell. Ms. Franklin lived with levels of disrespect I cannot even imagine. Even as a world-renowned musician from a young age, in the early years of her career, there were places she was not invited to sing, not invited to speak, and certainly not invited to stay. But that lack of regard did not anger her. It gave her greater voice. And in a segregated society that refused to value her simply because she spelled it out for us. R-E-S-P-E-C-T. Find out what it means to me. And what it meant, and what it means, is that Aretha Franklin was not a category, a color, a complication, or an irritation, or even an anomaly. She was a child of God like all of us, worthy of attention and welcome and deference and yes, R-E-S-P-E-C-T. This little spelling lesson may seem elementary to you, but she and Otis Redding before her have been spelling that word to us for more than 50 years, and still we get it wrong. As I'm sure is true for many of you, I have lain awake nights this week trying to make sense of the violence and the horror that appear anew every day. More pedophile priests than I ever dreamed existed. Shameless shootings only miles from here. Always more #MeToo. And national leaders behaving like playground bullies, calling each other names. It is almost more than I can bear. And the thread that ties all of this together is that the one who is harmed, whether it is a child or a woman or a basketball-playing teenager or a political opponent, is being regarded not as a person, but as an object, something to be used for my personal pleasure, something on which to vent all my pent-up anger, something to distract from my own faults. You can't respect someone and then shoot them on the street. You can't respect someone and then assault them. You can't respect someone and then call them names. Oh, Aretha, we miss you already. We are very near the end of the 5-week Jesus Bread of Life lectionary series. My apologies if it has been a bit tedious. This particular portion of John is not exactly a page-turner, but buried in the seemingly repetitive monologue lies a truth that still confounds. Remember at the beginning of the chapter what caused all of this commotion when Jesus fed his countless hearers with just a little boy's sack lunch? Remember how grateful they were? Of course you don't, because they weren't. When rumors rumbled through the crowd that Jesus had lunch catered in from Panera, but instead had multiplied it with his own hands, they skipped right over gratitude and went straight to grasping. First, they tried to take him captive. You may not have remembered that little piece of the story. Then they stalked him. He couldn't even rest. Then they doubted. Then they demanded, teach us how to do this too. And then they dared. What else can you do for us, Jesus? And then they mocked him. He says, I'm the bread of life that comes down from heaven. Their disrespect and selfishness are jaw-dropping. Jesus as a person was not interesting to them. Jesus as Son of God, they couldn't even imagine it. Their only interest in Jesus was that he was an obscurity, an object. He was only as interesting as his last performance. Jesus was to them a trained monkey, a genie in a lamp, a human ATM supporting all of their demands. R-E-S-P-E-C-T, excuse me, Aretha, but Jesus sang it before you, and he didn't get any either. These texts about Jesus, bread of life, means that Jesus is not just an object for our amusement, someone to answer all of our questions or respond to all of our needs, nor is he just an idea, a concept, a myth. He was for them. He is for us the very face of God in the world. Jesus is flesh and blood. He is a strong shoulder in a heavy wind. He is a guiding light on a dark night. He is a patient teacher when we are fools. He is sometimes a kick in the pants. That's why he says over and over and over again, I am flesh, I am blood, and unless you consume me totally, there is no life for you. He will say it again to Thomas later at the end of the gospel when Thomas doubts and Jesus says, look at the wounds. This is real blood. Look at my torn side. I am flesh. I am blood for you. Jesus is not an object for us to study, or an idea in a book, or a servant to be controlled. Jesus is the living, breathing face of God, God who loves us each by name, not as a category, but as a creation worthy of attention, worthy of respect. I often have very strange conversations as I go about my daily routine. You know, I hesitate to tell people I'm a pastor. I've heard confessions in the grocery store that you would not believe. People tell me things, or they ask me things, or they assume things. Sometimes I wonder if there's something tattooed on this very ordinary Iowa face that says, tell me too much information. In any event. After work one day, about 5 o'clock, I was walking my dog down the street and came upon a neighbor performing the same routine canine maintenance. I know them well enough, both dog and owner, to say hello, but that's about all. So I don't know what prompted him blurting out to me, but he volunteered very awkwardly, you know, before I retired, I worked with black people. I glanced over my shoulder to see if he was speaking to someone I couldn't see. Or perhaps he was that guy you see talking to himself on the phone, right? That he was having a conversation on his Bluetooth. I just looked at him. You know, he continued, I used to employ a lot of people before I sold the company. I must have hired 1,000, 1,500 black people, and I even knew some of their names. And then he just looked at me, hoping for... I had no idea. Did he want me to applaud, to act interested, or tell him that his white privilege was showing? I must have been silent long enough that he shrugged and said, oh, well, have a nice day, and went along his way. And I walked away thinking charitably to myself, rich, entitled old white guy. But I also know why it is that he approached me with this confession about his care for people who are black. Because when he saw me coming, he muttered under his breath, bleeding heart North Shore liberal. And then Aretha sang, and Jesus preached, and I was convicted. I had done to my neighbor exactly what he had done to me, and to all his former employees who happened to be black, some of whom had names. What is that? I had done to my neighbor what gangs do to innocent passers-by, what powerful men do to vulnerable women, what so-called men of God do to children, what fragile egos do to their opponents. I had done to my neighbor what Jesus' hearers had done to him. I made him an object, a category, a problem, a thing to be studied. And if there was any way for me next time I see him to apologize, I would, but he would be as befuddled by me as I was by him. Eat my flesh, drink my blood. We fail to recognize Jesus as a physical reality. Bread we can eat, wine we can drink, a creator who knows each creation by name. Sometimes we need to have it spelled out for us, like Aretha did. And Jesus, he can spell too. E-A-T-D-R-I-N-K. And most of all, and finally, the word of the wise to fools, L-O-V-E, love one another.